host for the Nebraska Somos One podcast. We're so excited to share with you today. I like to remind us that this is the podcast where we acknowledge our past, we embrace our present, and we're building our futuro. So today with us is Mike, and I'm going to mispronounce his last name, so I'm not going to even try. But he's the executive director and president or CEO of MAPA, the Metro Area Planning Agency here in the region. And we're really excited to share with him and us about strategic partnerships and what strategic partnerships can do for a community, a more inclusive community. So, bienvenido, Mike. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi. Well, thanks for having me, Itzel.
Oh, we're so excited. But Mike, before we start on our conversation, why don't you introduce yourself formally, because I did not want to say your last name.
Sure.
And maybe tell us a little bit about you, your background, and I'm assuming you're an Omahan, but if you're not, tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Sure. Well, I'm not an Omahan, actually. I'm from Iowa originally, so a small town, 5,000 people up in northwest Iowa. And I went to Iowa State University to be a regional planner, so a city planner, urban planner, you kind of hear these terms, but somebody who works typically in local government and sometimes with a private firm to think about kind of the future of a community, where investments might come from, how we make decisions about what buildings go where. And so my path to Omaha was actually, my wife is from Omaha.
Okay.
Like so many stories of, I met a girl from Nebraska.
Right.
But we both went to Iowa State, and when we got married, we decided we wanted to be in a community where we thought we both had great career opportunities. That brought us here, and I guess the rest is history. But my day job is I get to be executive director of the Metropolitan Area Planning Agency. So we're a regional organization. We serve 6 counties here in the Omaha Council Bluffs metro area. So we get to work in both states. We are really an extension of local government. But because we exist, the federal government looks at us as a great place for regional planning around economic development and also transportation. And so we do a lot of community assistance, a lot of grant writing, a lot of grant administration and things in that space.
So, Mike, did you grow up saying, I want to be a planner, a city regional planner when I grew up? How did that come across anyways?
There's actually, I told this story earlier this week, but I originally was going to be a music composition major. And so
No kidding.
I grew up, music was a huge part of my life. I played in, jazz band and concert band and marching band. I took piano lessons for 12 years of my life, played at church, did all of these things. And I just loved music and wanted to apply that. About 3 weeks before school started, right around this time of year, woke up in the middle of the night and had a panic attack about, am I really going to do this? I'd already applied for the program and gotten in, dug through all of my senior high school materials, found the course catalog for Iowa State and just started flipping through, looked over architecture, looked over political science, looked over engineering, and found planning, which kind of sits in the middle of all of those things. And so for me, I was like, this seems like something really interesting. And called the academic advisor, made the change, drove down, got all my classes changed, and I guess that's the rest is history. But I don't know how I stumbled into this, but I love it. And it really is something that, to my mind, it really sits at kind of the intersection of so many different disciplines, and that's what really keeps me going and keeping me engaged.
No kidding. And I love music, so I'm glad to hear how this transition, but at the same time, it's like, are you a musician anyways?
I don't play enough to count myself as a musician, but my son has kind of gotten into piano and into concert band, and that trying not to live vicariously through him, but it's really exciting to have that back in our house. And yeah, I've got a rack of guitars and a piano and a ukulele. So we're, we have music in our house.
Well, we'll have to get his contact information and hire him at the next quinceañera. It's what we're hearing. But today's theme is about strategic partnerships and how strategic partnerships, if done well, can create a more inclusive community. And today we're talking about Omaha, but certainly this applies to any region. National level, if collective power actually came together. And so let's start our conversation about why this is important. And let's begin with leadership. What do you think is the most effective leadership, and how does that look like when looking towards shared prosperity in a community? Let's just use Omaha as an example.
Sure. To my mind, I think leadership, it comes in a lot of different forms, but I think the leaders that, I look to and that I see in communities large and small here in our region are the ones that really start with that kind of collaboration. And they're people who They know what they don't know. They know that there are people in their community or in their neighborhood or in their region that have something to offer, and they kind of lead with that. And I think it's also, while there are decisions along the way, I think people who view it more as a process and view it kind of as this constant refinement and this reshaping of, maybe we have this large aspirational goal that's sitting out there, but it's a lot of small steps towards that, and it's not a straight line. And so where are the opportunities to get a little closer and to build those relationships? And I think that's the other piece of it. I think leadership in organizations, in local government and state government and everywhere, the people who start with people and the people who invest in people and try to invest in people around them, really build a network of people that I think don't just understand the direction that you're going, but really are kind of drawn to it, hopefully. And you can find those people that, really become that group that helps you move things forward. So, I don't think that's like one thing. I think there's people in the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector that really excel at this, and they're not necessarily always pointed in the same direction, but I think those commonalities and bringing those streams of things together is really, it's a lot of work, but it's also a huge opportunity.
People make places, right? And to live well with the public and the private sector and very defined, right? Like, oh, well, I can only do this because this is what my company allows me to do. And, oh, we should be serving all because this is a public space. But to collaborate, to effectively create positive, long-lasting change takes time. And you're right about relationships. And I forgot to mention or ask you directly, how long have you been in this role at MAPA?
Sure. So I've been with MAPA for just over 12 years, and I've been executive director for 4 now. And so my prior work at MAPA had largely been around transportation planning. So one of those roles that we get, it's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And so my career at MAPA prior to becoming executive director had really focused on that federal transportation planning process. There's grants that go out to communities for infrastructure projects, and there's a lot of planning that we have to do. But a big part of it is public engagement, and MAPA had really worked kind of intentionally to try to figure out a different way of doing it. And, I think through that process, we ended up with more questions than answers. And so part of the commitment I had when I became executive director was really thinking about where are these opportunities for us to have more of this continuous process, this continuous conversation with the community, so that we're not trying to spin up new things every time we have a new project. We're not trying to mobilize people and explain who we are, but that people just kind of know what we're doing, and influential folks like yourself within communities can help us connect to conversations that are already going on so that we don't have to do that ourselves. And so that role at MAPA prior to this, it's kind of our largest program. It's the kind of the biggest dollar amount that we have. And so it has an outsized impact on sort of our total impact as an organization, but it's really just kind of one of several things that we're doing on an annual basis.
Oh my goodness, 12 years. I guess I had no idea. So I'm sure you have a story or a moment where leadership in your work made a significant impact in our community of Omaha. Can you nail one of many of those that you can share with us today?
Boy, I'm trying to think. Well, I think, there's a number of them, but, just even looking to, one major project that we helped facilitate. There's kind of 2 that happened near to each other. Part of the COVID recovery funds, part of those funds came to us, and they were sort of these infrastructure dollars, and there weren't any strings attached. We could have just kind of put it into the normal program and allocated it to existing projects, but what we recognized is that these were one-time funds, and so we really wanted to figure out a way of getting those directly to all the communities in our region, which is not something that we normally do. Normally it's a competitive application process, and you go through this kind of effort to say, okay, what's our best opportunity to invest as a region today? But with these funds that came through this local government assistance, similar to all the ARPA dollars, we were like, we just need to get these out to the communities. And so it took a lot of work, and it was our previous director, Greg, who actually negotiated that with the state of Nebraska Department of Transportation, to take those funds and supplement the normal kind of roadway funds that every community got. So that was everybody from Omaha to Cass County to Boys Town, which is its own village in Nebraska, all received their kind of proportional share of those dollars, and were able to, put those into action and really hopefully catch up on things that they got to direct. And it was state dollars rather than federal. And so from our perspective, it was just a huge opportunity to kind of put that in practice. Another thing, we do a lot of regional coordination. Another NDOT project that I think is just a tremendous point of leadership is they were rebuilding bridges over the Platte River on Highway 75. And as part of that, they were expanding the highway. It was going to become a freeway. And within federal law, if it's a freeway, you can't be a cyclist or a pedestrian on that. And if you look at a big map and you say, well, where can bicyclists cross the Platte River, or where can they get between these two counties? There were only two. One is the Lead Bridge over closer to Louisville, and one was this bridge. So with that freeway designation, we were essentially blocking off that cycling traffic. And so in really kind of as they were ramping up to construct that project, MAPA pulled together some partners and worked with the Papio NRD and the counties and local jurisdictions and said, well, let's take advantage of this opportunity. Let's at least make sure that we're not precluding a bike trail from being built here. And ultimately what happened is that NDOT committed to putting out the girders, so kind of the structure under the trail, with a requirement that MAPA help facilitate the construction of that trail within a certain number of years. And we did that. And so if you go down there today, you can actually cross between the Platte. It's hung off the side of the bridge. We didn't have to impact traffic on the bridge because we did it while NDOT was doing this other work. And now there's agreements between all those communities about how that gets maintained for the long term as well. And so it's really that, we aren't a substitute for political will, but where we have local governments that are interested in solving a problem, we're a really useful convener to make that problem solving actually happen. And so that's really, I think, a good example of another example, and both those projects are just within the last 5 years.
Oh, wow. They are great projects, and I hadn't heard about them. So, yeah, we certainly need to do a better job of learning how organizations like MAPA is leading inclusive, equitable access to spaces. And so that's impressive. So let's talk about cross-sector partnerships. Can you talk about a specific partnership that's helped advance a cause of shared prosperity? Again, talking about Omaha or the region that you can think of.
There's a lot of them. I think, when we look at cross-sectoral partnerships, you look at an organization like MAPA, our, sort of official kind of name would be a regional planning council or a council of governments, kind of where we are, a regional grouping of governments that invest in an organization like us to be a shared resource and then also facilitate some of these interjurisdictional planning. And so, we start with local government. That's where our authority comes from. It's where our partnership with those communities is realized each year with their investment in us. And when we look at cross-sectoral partnerships, you really have to think about, well, where are the opportunities to make that kind of an impact? And there are dozens of examples to highlight, because I think part of what the work that we uncovered as we went into the Heartland 2050 Regional Vision back in 2014 is that these issues are ones that businesses are trying to work on and help solve. So good examples with transportation. So many people, sort of rotate out of a job or leave a job or get fired because they don't have reliable transportation. They're not able to make that second week or that third week Monday. And that lack of reliable transportation is really something that for many entry-level jobs within the region is a huge barrier for their success. And you take that and you add on to that so many jobs have left kind of the urban core and have left sort of the older parts of our community to more suburban locations. There's a wider spatial gap, and especially between communities that have larger shares of unemployment, have larger share of low-income populations. And so that spatial gap, that's a land use problem. That's a transportation problem. That's a business problem. It's a workforce problem. And so that's probably a great example of where our regional transportation planning has really brought a number of partners together to kind of think about that solving. Our real dipping our toe into that happened through the Heartland 2050 regional visioning process, but it's something that we've sustained, and it's been hard because, again, our core is that local government piece. But to your point about community-based organizations, you look at the way that philanthropy invests in workforce, philanthropy invests in place-based solutions. In Council Bluffs, you see an infrastructure project like the First Avenue Trail that is a city project that transformed an existing rail line into a great multimodal trail. But the city also came in and changed all of their land use, their zoning policies, to be oriented to the trail. So as things are built, as these new apartment buildings are built, they actually orient themselves to the trail. And so this amenity, this recreational amenity, is also a transportation amenity. And it's really that cross-sectoral partnership that allowed that project, that trail project, to happen. And now you're seeing private investment come in and actually build out and build out that land use policy that's going to create this great quality of life for folks who live along the corridor. And so there's hundreds of examples of that happening every day in this region. We are so fortunate for not just the public sector, but the nonprofit, the philanthropic sector, and really, I think, long-range thinking business leaders that try to shape this community. And it's something that stands out when I talk to peers across the country, just how cross-sectoral the work is. But there's a lot of silos. And so it's how do we break those down and kind of do that work each day to make us get a little bit closer to that aspiration?
Yeah, and I was thinking about silos and maybe additional challenges or opportunities that arise from bringing together those different sectors you spoke about, from the community development organizations to the businesses to the government entities. How do you even get them to work towards the same common goal? I mean, do you have dedicated staff that are just focused on strategic partnerships? Like, how do you manage?
A lot of it's opportunistic. I think a lot of times there may be a grant opportunity or things that kind of force you to get to the table and really kind of lay out what those opportunities, like what you're trying to work on today. I think one of the things that we've invested a lot of resources in and where we have actual dedicated staff and built just an incredible team over the last several years is in this idea of shared measurement, that part of shaping this narrative, part of shaping the work kind of towards these shared goals is kind of using the same playbook. And we've invested a lot of time, we did in Heartland 2050, kind of getting around our hands around, as we grow, as we add 500,000 people by 2050, where they live impacts our ability to, support the infrastructure, to address transportation challenges, to have and maintain the quality of life that attracts people here. And also that if we build out the plans as they were at that time, we weren't going to have a very good mix of housing choices for people, and that was going to impact affordability. And so as we get to these kinds of thoughts about, leading with data, kind of trying to be that partner that's continuously messaging on some of these issues and trying to wrap our heads around, this really wide cone of uncertainty and maybe just narrowing it down a bit, but being that trusted partner in the room to just at least put the pieces together and start thinking about it and building narratives around some of these data points. That's been something that we've leaned into a lot in our transportation planning, where our long-range transportation plan doesn't have goals that you would normally see in a long-range plan. They're not, we're going to move cars efficiently, we're going to reduce barriers for freight, we're going to, make sure that we grow the economy. Our first two goals are about access to opportunity and then talent attraction and retention, that employers rely on a reliable transportation system, and many employees and workers have barriers in that. And so we need to be focused on reducing those barriers. And for talent attraction and retention, as we think about our community and the places, the neighborhoods, having choices in lifestyles for people that maybe they want a more urban lifestyle, maybe they want a suburban lifestyle. The core across all of those, however, when we go out and talk to the community, is they want walkable communities that are connected by transportation options. So that means different things in different communities, but the core of that core thread is a similar playbook. But we wouldn't know that if we didn't go out and ask people. We wouldn't know that if we didn't go do planning in all these communities and talk to the local public and to the stakeholders about what those aspirations are. And again, that's in some ways, it's that investment in that continuous conversation and really using and knowing and owning the data and building narratives around it that help us kind of close the gap between what the public desires and our ability to actually deliver those kinds of projects.
So would you say that will be advice for communities across not just the region that you work in, but other regions across the nation in regards to, how do they begin? Like, what will be the advice you provide? I mean, I'm gathering that's
I don't like giving people advice, Itzel, but I think the advice I would have is, like, there are tremendous opportunities to really think thoughtfully about, what does it all add up to, right? At the top line level, if we're talking about quality of life, how would we know that somebody's quality of life is improved? And what does that mean for somebody who's living in a community and they're 8 years old? What does that mean for somebody who's living in a community and they're 80 years old? And across that continuum of their life, where are our opportunities to invest in places or in programs or in projects that actually make sure that they can have that throughout their entire life? And I think data is really powerful in that. You see a lot of partnerships across the country where, philanthropy leads those kinds of efforts. You see a lot of efforts where organizations like MAPA lead those efforts and try to, bring together the stakeholders and all of these data points and make some sense out of it, that we can't boil the ocean, but if we focus on, these 3, 4, 5 things, we can do that. And I would say I think we've done a lot, but I think we also have a long way to grow to kind of bring some of those decision-making streams together. But I think it's that commitment, and back to kind of your initial question on leadership, it's that commitment to ensuring that we are bending that arc and getting a little bit closer to this idea of how we think things should work. And it's an investment of time, it's an investment of resources, and it's a shift in perspective in some ways.
It is. And if we want to build a stronger, more effective cross-sector partnership, we should be challenged to think that you have to have conversations, and if we'll feel uncomfortable, because if it doesn't feel uncomfortable, then you might not be working on a big enough of a project, or a big of not important, but a long-lasting change that will impact generations. So I hear you. So let's talk about prosperity again. So in your view, what does shared prosperity look like? Not just for the Omaha-Metro area, you mentioned you're from Iowa. And how can we ensure that everyone benefits from, even if it's not ourselves directly? You know, let's think about our kids. What would that look like?
I mean, I think it looks like a lot of things, but just to give a few examples, I mean, you use the word inclusivity, and I think oftentimes people, you know, think about that word and they think about it in a particular context, but if you go and you talk to somebody on Main Street on South 24th Street, or you go and you talk to somebody in a small community in Iowa, their thought process about their own agency, their ability to change things is oftentimes to their thought about how included they are in the process, how removed they are from, you know, either decision making in their employer or decision making in their community or their country. And I think that notion of inclusivity is really the antidote in many ways to people's feeling aimless, feeling like their lives are out of their control. But part of that comes to knowing what their concerns are, knowing what their aspirations are, and knowing enough about that at scale within a community, within a neighborhood, within a region, to be effective leaders of that change and to bring those conversations together to reshape how resources are allocated, or to find new resources, or to redirect existing resources. And I think that notion of inclusivity is really powerful, because we talk a lot about disinvestment or other things in urban communities. Rural communities have gone through something very, very similar. You look at the farm crisis that have shaped communities in Nebraska and Iowa, many of them haven't bounced back. And many of the problems that we're seeing, whether it's aging housing stock or the lack of opportunities or schools that are struggling or facing consolidation, it comes from things that were shaped generations ago. And it comes from families that economically may not have recovered, or communities that haven't recovered. They lost the Main Street store. And so from our perspective, and part of our partnership with you at LEDC has been to think about, okay, this context of community development, this context of neighborhood development is really an acknowledgement that there's these Main Street problems everywhere. And how do we know enough and have kind of thought through our playbook for connecting with leaders in these spaces that we're thoughtful about what those opportunities are, and bringing that public sector experience, bringing that experience with state and federal grants and grant administration and planning, and thinking about, well, if we had the conversation this way, we could open up this opportunity, or if we thought about our needs in this way, maybe there's funding on the other side. And it's really, I think, a generalization in some ways, just to say, you know, people are people, and I think giving people an opportunity to be included in the process, to be leaders in their own community, to shape the neighborhoods and the places that they live, is so essential to it. But there are big gaps in that today. I mean, you talk to average person on the street, they don't think any of that is attainable. And I think as a public sector leader, it's kind of a personal goal of mine to reshape that for communities that we serve, because I think people should feel included. And as much as we can, we should try to be responsive to that, or at least know it so we can communicate the gaps that we're not feeling. And so in my mind, if we're successful in that feels like shared prosperity to me, because I think prosperity is somewhat individualized. I think prosperity, people's own feeling of that is really kind of their own accounting of where they are in their life, and it's probably not the same throughout their life. And I think it does start with the people. It does start with people's lived experiences, and that's shaped by their jobs, that's shaped by their communities, it's shaped by their schools, it's shaped by all of those things that contribute to, you know, their feeling of attachment or not to what's going on around them.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, so you referenced Harlem 2050 maybe a couple times, and I'm thinking about when this plan was developed, and if I remember, you said 2014?
Yeah.
Okay, so, 2014, my daughter was 10, 2024, now she's 20. And so I'm thinking about, like, how does a plan like 2050 include, in order to be inclusive, of the people that it will actually benefit, people like my daughter, right? How do they get part of this process when these plans are being drafted for the future? And that's why I said, what does that shared prosperity look like, even though we may not see it ourselves?
Yeah, that is something we think about a lot. We're not good at it, and we got to get better at it. One project we did, though, to kind of put that in context for people, it was really coming out of COVID, and we called it Heartland 2050 Babies, and we had an event I think it was in 2021. We called it Baby Steps, Giant Leaps, and it was about what we have to do to kind of take this big regional vision and really think about it in the context of the decisions that we're making as leaders today, tomorrow, next year. And what we did was we met with families in multiple counties around the region. This is all available on our website, and you can go see the interviews. But it was really about, children that were born in 2020, what their parents thought about the communities they lived in, what their aspirations were for the community and for the child. And then we actually kind of talked about some of those measures of Heartland 2050, those things that we were trying to change in sort of milestones of that kid's life. When that child's 1 year old, here's something that happened. And when the child's 10, here's how many new affordable housing units we have to actually have built just to support, what's going on. And, they'll be 20 in this time, and they'll be going to college, and where will they choose? Will they want to come back to this community? And so we've definitely thought about it. Are we good at engaging with the youth? No. And I don't know what that looks like. I would welcome ideas for what that looks like and where the right place to do. But I feel for these kids. I've got a 12-year-old down to a 3-year-old, and the world is changing rapidly, and the workplace is changing rapidly. Education is changing rapidly, and I mean, I can see just that feeling of disillusionment about how in control they are of some of that stuff, and their community is just one dimension of that, and. Boy, I would love to know what that looks like at scale, or where people are finding success in that. Yeah. But that's not something that we've succeeded at yet, for sure.
No, like I said, I don't know that there's a playbook out there yet. But it's to your point about maybe it's not the appropriate term, but like the COVID babies, right? So I'm thinking about my granddaughter, who now plays with a doll that wears a mask. And I'm thinking, like, what? And she normalizes that, right? And I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't she when, she was a COVID baby? And that's what she grew up. I mean, she was a little baby and she had to wear a mask. And I'm thinking, like, now she has a toy that actually has a mask. Yeah. And, like, how we're not assimilating this change. But you're right. Moments like the pandemic, but not just the pandemic, which was, transformational to many of us. To think that plan was developed in 2014, and to think that those folks, who would have been then and will be older, and actually the executors of the plan, they're not part of the process. Or if they were, how do they get plugged in now? I mean, it's a challenge. I agree. I don't know that anyone, at least I don't know, how to integrate them, but certainly figuring out a way to bring them up to speed to get engaged. Isn't that funny on the doll with the with the mask? I'm like, why do they have a mask? So what do you, let's talk about ensuring economic development in Omaha in a way that does not leave behind marginalized communities, but instead helps uplift them. Of course, our relationship and our partnership's been something that we brag about. We just had a consultant join us from our partnership in the Equity Investments Initiative that we're both participating in, and then Kate did not wait to recognize that we are far along than many other communities because at least there's a partnership in place now. But so what else, right? Like what's missing and what could have been done or what can still be done to continue to uplift not just marginalized communities like the Latinos, but like across the board, because we are a very diverse community.
Yeah, we are. And I think, from our standpoint, a lot of what our work amounts to is capacity building. That's really why the counties invest in us each year. It's part of our role as an MPO. It's part of our role as an economic development district. And within the space of economic development, I guess, one of the things I recognized kind of, right before, we started sort of the partnership with LEDC is that we had this wave of funding coming through the COVID bills, whether it was ARPA or other things, and a lot of it was being directed to communities most impacted by the pandemic, which is North and South Omaha. But that map represented a lot of what we see in other federal priorities, whether they're HUD or USDOT or EPA, and all of these federal programs that we touch on. Those maps overlap, and you think about, okay, well, that's probably measuring something that sits between all of these other things that we're trying to measure, whether it's social vulnerability or it's access to transportation or it's people's income or their a need for housing assistance. And I was thinking, we were having all of this investment go into these communities, and a lot of it was going to community-based organizations. And I was just remarking and thinking with our team at that time about all of these organizations. Like we know them, we may have them on our mailing list for things, we may invite them to meetings, but we don't necessarily know what they're working on. And what we recognized through the planning that went on with the North-South Omaha recovery grants is that a lot of the projects that were identified had been identified 5 years prior or 10 years prior or 20 years prior. And how do we sort of constantly fill up that queue of things that we know are priorities within communities and make those connections to potential resources? And a lot of it relies on that kind of public-private partnership, whether there's a nonprofit that has identified a need. At some point, the city, the county, some other special purpose unit of government is going to have some role in either approving or supporting or partnering on that project. And back to that economic development district role we saw and that thought process about supporting Main Street development everywhere within the urban communities of our region, we saw kind of a gap and a coordination gap. And I think one of the most telling moments for me is we were working on sort of stakeholders along the 24th Street corridor, and LEDC and the South Omaha Business Improvement District were on the kind of South Omaha side. We were working with the North Omaha or North 24th Street Business Improvement District on the north side, and Spark on the North Omaha Trail. And even though we had heard from all of you repeatedly about the work you were doing, you all didn't know what was going on. And we had played a small role in either getting technical assistance or supporting with grants and things, and we thought, okay, well, this feels like a space to help fill. And I think part of that is just this connected conversation to learn from one another, to build those relationships, and to get out of some of our silos, whether those silos are funding related, they're programmatic, or they're geographic. And I think for us, we see opportunity to pursue federal funding if we know that there's projects available. But I think the other side of it for us is that there's a community of practice that people are really working in our community from a variety of different perspectives, whether they're in the private sector, nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector, that are using place-based strategies. They're looking at neighborhoods, they're looking at transportation networks, they're looking at trail networks, they're looking at housing, and they're trying to put the pieces together, and we can learn from each other. And I think that was maybe the recognition that our work maybe shouldn't just be more back-footed and waiting for people to call us and say, hey, will you help us with this grant application, but trying to figure out something we could sustain, to have our foot in a lot of little conversations, be that connective tissue between some of these things, and then ultimately hopefully play a role in resourcing that work. And so I think that's the playbook. I think for us, it's something that we found a lot of success in, but it's continuous. It's not a ramp up and ramp down. It's kind of this ground game that we need to have to be relevant in our largest communities and our smallest communities. And so we're doing the same thing with small communities where maybe they have a new mayor or a city council that gets elected. or maybe we've worked with them for a lot of years, but we just are kind of always just out of reach, and doing that planning, that prioritization, that goal setting, and starting small and just trying to find something that we know we can work on, that we're committed to, and trying to find the resources to move that over the finish line. And it's that problem solving. I think there's no cap on the number of people who are creative problem solvers that can be working in a community to get things done. And our staff were just sort of uniquely situated to at least be a little bit of a fire starter for some of those conversations, and hopefully then being relevant on the back end as we're starting to deliver things as well.
I love that. So, I mean, I'm hearing a bunch of rewards, right, from doing strategic partnerships, intentional partnerships. But what do you think is the most rewarding part of this journey, or at least in our relationship and our partnership? Where do you see our work and the work that other communities in the regions that you serve heading in the next few years?
Well, I think there's probably the biggest reward comes in the fact that we're not crazy. I mean, I think part of it is, you have ideas about the way you think should work, and then you maybe invest a little bit of time, you build relationships, and you get around a table and you say, well, what if we tried to do something differently? And then you have more people who want to join that table. And I think that's been something that I think we've seen over the last several years that's been really rewarding, is that, okay, there's something here, like we can't do it alone, but there's something here that we can maybe go deep in a couple of different areas and really try to understand this kind of, the depth and the breadth of the need and the opportunity and the relationships and the partnerships and how to put projects together. And then we can generalize that and use that as a playbook that when somebody picks up the phone and calls us, like we kind of know our role, we know our role in shaping it, but we can also connect them to this other community practice that's already here within the region and build some of those relationships between groups. And I think, we just are always in meetings, in conversations, meeting people, and not taking that for granted, and really viewing it as an opportunity to be a resource, even in that peer exchange, in those opportunities to kind of learn from each other and share it out. We're doing, we've always done this through Heartland 2050, but we have these committees that you don't have to actually have any orientation to MAPA. You just have to have an interest in housing and development or infrastructure or natural resources, and putting those people to work and helping them, shape conversations about everything from solid waste and influencing policy at the state level down to TIF and just providing, an actual look at what is happening with TIF in communities, not taking a position, but just trying to put a resource together that says, these are the people shaping it, this is the communities that are using it, and here's what they're doing, year over year. And just trying to demystify some of these things for people who maybe want to take that step and learn more or connect with somebody locally. And to my mind, it's that investment in people, investment in the relationships, investment in things that, it takes time, but it really doesn't cost us anything to take that extra step. And so for our mind, it's the kind of thing that I find deeply rewarding and gratifying. Our team does too, because it makes us just understand where that next opportunity might come from, even though that's not immediate. It might be a year or 2, 5 down the line, that the organization being partner to these conversations, showing up in different places, showing up in different ways, thinking about the problem-solving process differently, kind of uncaps our opportunity as an organization. So that's, I think, the most rewarding part for us.
That's awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, the most rewarding thing is that we get to celebrate together next week. Mm-hmm. So, as we wrap up the podcast and as we look ahead into next week, we are excited to share that MAPA, the Metro Area Planning Agency, alongside LEDC, will be celebrating at the Adelante Gala next Thursday. And we couldn't be more proud, Mike, to gotten to know you and your team as we have worked together over the last 2 years to just learn more about each other, build that trust that you talked about. Is not just about getting on our email list, which is important, but also like really going down and in getting to know the community, learning about the gaps, learning about our future opportunities, whether they're immediate or not, and to see some synchronized, wish lists. And that wish list looks in many different capacities. Like you said, maybe it's a grant, maybe it's, tangible things like, I love the story you shared about the Platte River. and many of that can come, right? When strategic partnerships are intentional about including others and making sure that the people that this will be affected by are part of the process in some capacity. And so we're really excited for our partnership. And as we wrap up the podcast, any last words on regards to what you're looking ahead in the rest of the summer, which the summer's almost over, for you personally, and how it ties to, the shared prosperity mindset?
Well, I would just say first, we're honored to be recognized at the Adelante Gala. And I think, any recognition that we get out of this, I'm going to throw back at you, because you saw the LinkedIn post about an opportunity and picked up the phone or email and called and said, hey, is this something we could work on together? And so I would just say it's as much a testament to your leadership and commitment to the work as it is ours. And so we were happy to show up and do all of that. I think as we look ahead to fall, it's busy. My kids are back in school. I don't really think about it as summer anymore. And so, for us, we've got a lot of things going on. We have a collaborative futures summit on September 9th down in Bellevue that we're hosting with the Greater Omaha Economic Development Partnership. And so we actually have Del Gines, Dr. Del Gines, who's an Omaha native, but is the Chief Innovation Officer from IEDC, who's going to be talking about how do we get out of these economic development silos? How do we get out of these, maybe echo chambers that we find ourselves in and think about the big picture. So tremendously excited to have Del's wisdom and his passion for problem solving in this space on September 9th. And then on October 8th, we're actually having our annual dinner up at Fort Calhoun at the Northern Lights venue, celebrating all our work for the last year and really kind of charting a course for the next year. We've got our own awards that we'll be announcing here shortly as well, and just kind of recognizing people around the region who are doing great work that adds up to a greater quality of life for the region as a whole. So we got a busy fall, but it's always busy this time of year, but it's mostly celebrating, and so we're always excited to do that.
Yeah, it's fun, right? All right, well, we can't wait to see you again. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. Again, this is Itzel and Mike, and we're here to serve you, so reach out anytime. So that's a wrap. Thank you.